Emily Harris had always been good at pretending. She could smile, she could laugh, but there was one thing she could never hide: the bruises. They were there, always, beneath the surface, no matter how many layers of makeup she applied, no matter how carefully she chose her clothes. No one needed to know. No one could know. And she intended to keep it that way. It was easier to just blend in, to be the quiet waitress who never made waves, who never stood out. But life had a way of forcing you to be noticed, whether you wanted it or not. That night, as she maneuvered through the crowded ballroom, carrying a tray of champagne flutes, her thoughts were far from the luxurious gala unfolding around her. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the weight of the tray but from the memory of the argument she'd had just hours before with Tyler. The argument that had left her bruised once again. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was just Emily, the girl from the small town who worked 3 jobs, who kept her head down and her eyes on the floor. Tonight, no one needed to know who she really was. No one needed to know the scars, the pain. And yet, as she approached a table of well-dressed guests, a sharp glance from one of them sent a shiver down her spine. He stood at the center of the group, tall and commanding. His dark suit, perfectly tailored, screamed power in a way that made even the air around him feel different. His eyes, cold and calculating, briefly met hers. There was something about his gaze that made her heart skip a beat. It wasn't the kind of look a man gives a woman who's simply serving him dinner, it was the kind of look that made her feel seen. Really seen. For a moment, Emily thought she might be imagining it. She turned her attention back to the table, offering her most practiced smile, even though the weight of his gaze lingered. Dominic Marino wasn't just any guest at the event. He wasn't just a rich businessman enjoying his evening. He was something far more dangerous. And the way he watched her, as if he knew everything, sent a chill up her spine. She tried to focus on the task at hand, but something kept pulling her attention back. To him. Was it the way he moved with such purpose, the confidence that radiated from him, or the way his eyes seemed to pierce right through her? Emily couldn't decide. All she knew was that she had to escape his gaze, had to make it through the evening without drawing his attention too much. But as she set the drinks down, her sleeve shifted slightly, revealing the bruises she'd tried so hard to hide. Dominic's eyes immediately flicked to her arm. In that instant, Emily knew that he had seen them. And that was the moment everything changed. Dominic Marino wasn't just any man. He wasn't just a guest at the gala. He was a Mafia boss, a man who didn't take kindly to injustice, and for the first time, Emily was afraid of what would happen next. Emily tried to shake off the unease that had settled in her chest. She had been in the service industry for years, but there was something about Dominic Marino that made her skin prickle with discomfort. His gaze hadn't left her, even after she had moved away to tend to the rest of the guests. The ballroom was full of laughter and clinking glasses, but to Emily, it felt like a distant hum, her focus entirely on the man whose presence loomed like a shadow. She could feel his eyes on her, piercing through her every movement. As she refilled a glass for another table, her hand trembled slightly, betraying her calm exterior. She couldn't get his face out of her mind. The man was everything she tried to avoid: powerful, confident, untouchable. And yet, there was something about him that seemed to understand the deepest corners of her soul. Emily, a voice called from behind her, snapping her out of her thoughts. She turned to find her co-worker, Maria, standing there with a concerned expression. "Are you okay?" Maria asked softly, glancing over at Dominic and then back at Emily. Emily forced a smile, nodding quickly. "I'm fine, just a little tired." "It's been a long night," she replied, hoping her voice didn't betray the anxiety she was feeling. Maria didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press the matter. Emily turned back toward the guests, trying to focus on the task at hand. However, as she moved through the crowd again, Dominic's presence felt even stronger, like a magnet pulling her closer. His eyes were still fixed on her, and this time, she couldn't ignore it. He made his way toward her with purposeful steps, his gaze never wavering. The crowd seemed to part for him, and Emily felt her heart race. She had never been so acutely aware of someone in her life. As he approached, Emily's pulse quickened, and she took a small step back, suddenly feeling the weight of the room closing in around her. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth, carrying a subtle authority that sent a chill down her spine. "Emily, right?" His voice was calm, yet there was an undeniable intensity behind his words. She nodded, her throat dry. "Yes, that's right." "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. Dominic's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "You're doing just fine, thank you," he said. He didn't take his eyes off her, and for a moment, Emily felt exposed, as if he could see straight through her carefully constructed walls. "I noticed something earlier," he continued, his tone casual but laced with something else. "Something about you. You're not like the others." Emily forced herself to meet his gaze, even though the weight of his stare made her stomach twist. "I'm just here to do my job," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Dominic studied her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But there's something more to you, Emily. I can see it." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. What was he getting at? Why was he looking at her like that? Before she could think of anything to say, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as if nothing had happened. Emily stood frozen for a few moments, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had to shake off the feeling that lingered in the air, the one that told her things were about to change. That meeting wasn't just a coincidence. There was something about Dominic Marino that felt destined, as if their paths were always meant to cross. And though she had no idea what that meant for her, she couldn't deny the strange pull he had on her, one that felt dangerous, yet impossible to resist. The next few days felt like a blur to Emily. She tried to push the memory of Dominic's gaze to the back of her mind, but no matter how hard she tried, it lingered there, haunting her in quiet moments. At work, she was always on edge, constantly aware of the way people looked at her, especially him. She could feel his presence, even when he wasn't there. It was as though the night they had met had shifted something inside her, something she wasn't sure how to handle. She kept her head down, stayed busy, and tried to forget about the dark eyes that had seen too much. But when the phone rang one afternoon while she was cleaning the kitchen, her heart skipped. It was a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" she said, her voice tentative. "Emily Harris?" a deep voice asked on the other end of the line. The accent was unmistakable, Italian, smooth, controlled. She knew immediately who it was. "This is Emily," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. "Dominic Marino," he said, and the way he said his name sent a strange shiver down her spine. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Emily froze. She had no idea how he had gotten her number, but she knew that this was no coincidence. Her stomach twisted. "No, not at all," she said, her words coming out more calmly than she felt. What can I do for you?" "I'd like to meet you," he said simply. "There's something I think we should discuss." His tone was businesslike, but there was an undertone of something else in his words. Emily didn't know what to make of it. She felt a pang of unease. "I don't," she started to say, but he cut her off gently. "I'm not asking for anything difficult, Emily. Just a conversation. A dinner, perhaps. Just you and me. No distractions." His words were like a command, though wrapped in politeness. She didn't have a choice. Something in his voice made it clear that saying no wasn't really an option. She swallowed hard, unsure of what to say next. "Okay," she finally replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "When?" "Tomorrow evening," he said. "I'll pick you up at 7. I'll send a car for you." "Okay," she repeated, though she wasn't sure what was happening. The phone call ended soon after, and Emily stood there, her phone still pressed to her ear, staring at nothing. She felt like she had just agreed to something she couldn't undo. The thought of seeing him again filled her with a mix of dread and something else, something she couldn't identify. She wasn't sure what she was afraid of more, Dominic himself or what he represented. She had heard the rumors about him. Everyone had. He wasn't just some wealthy businessman. He was a force in the city, someone with power and influence, someone who wasn't used to being refused. And now he wanted to meet her? But why? Emily tried to shake the unease, tried to focus on the rest of her day, but it was impossible. She felt like she was on the verge of something she couldn't control. The next evening, Emily found herself standing in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, her thoughts racing. She wasn't sure what to wear. What did one wear when meeting a man like Dominic Marino? She didn't have the luxury of expensive dresses or designer shoes, but she knew she had to look presentable. After a few moments of indecision, she settled on a simple black dress that she had worn to a few formal events before. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As she made her way to the front door, she could hear the car pull up outside. Her heart raced. This was it. The moment she had been dreading, and, somehow, anticipating. She took a deep breath and stepped outside, meeting the driver who escorted her to the waiting car. The drive was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the engine as they made their way to the restaurant. Emily didn't speak, her mind swirling with a million thoughts. What was Dominic Marino thinking? What did he want from her? She had no answers, only a growing sense of unease. When the car finally stopped, she stepped out into the cool evening air and looked up at the elegant building in front of her. The restaurant was upscale, luxurious, and everything Emily was not. The doorman greeted her politely and led her inside, where the quiet hum of conversation filled the air. She spotted Dominic immediately. He was sitting at a table near the window, his back straight, his gaze locked on her as she approached. There was no mistaking it, this was a man who knew exactly what he wanted, and he was used to getting it. "Good evening, Emily," he said, his voice smooth and warm as she sat down across from him. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, though she still couldn't shake the feeling that she was in over her head. As Emily sat across from Dominic, she couldn't help but notice how different this was from any other dinner she had ever experienced. The restaurant was elegant, everything about it screamed sophistication and wealth, from the polished silverware to the soft lighting that gave the room a warm, intimate glow. Dominic, however, seemed to be in his own world, completely at ease in a place like this, while Emily felt out of place, her hands resting awkwardly on the table. His dark eyes were still locked on her, and she could feel the weight of his gaze as he studied her, as though he were measuring her every reaction. The waiter came and went, placing a glass of wine in front of each of them, but neither of them said anything at first. Dominic's silence was unsettling, and Emily found herself fidgeting in her seat. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight like this, and certainly not like this, dinner with a man who held so much power. "How are you enjoying the evening so far?" Dominic finally asked, his voice breaking the tension. Emily cleared her throat, trying to gather her thoughts. "It's beautiful," she replied, her voice steady but her mind racing. "I've never been to a place like this before." Dominic smiled slightly, though his expression remained unreadable. "I know. That's why I asked you to join me here tonight." He took a slow sip of his wine, never once looking away from her. "I wanted to talk to you, Emily. I think we need to have a conversation about something important." His words hung in the air between them, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had a sense that this wasn't just a casual dinner. There was something more going on here, something she didn't quite understand. "What kind of conversation?" she asked, trying to sound more composed than she felt. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his posture confident, as though he were used to having the upper hand. "About you, Emily. About who you are, and what I see in you." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he had been thinking about this for some time. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear what he had to say. "I don't understand," she said quietly, her voice betraying the confusion she was feeling. Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time since they had met, he seemed to relax slightly. "You're hiding something," he said, his tone calm but insistent. "I can see it in you. The way you carry yourself, the way you try to keep people at a distance. You're not the person you're pretending to be, Emily. His words hit her harder than she expected. She had always been good at hiding her pain, at keeping it all locked away where no one could see. But Dominic's words made her feel exposed in a way she hadn't felt before. I'm just trying to live my life, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm just trying to get by. Dominic studied her for a moment longer, and then his expression softened. I know. But you're not getting by, Emily. You're surviving, yes, but that's not the same thing. His words lingered in the air, and Emily found herself at a loss for what to say. How could he understand? How could he know what it was like to be trapped in a life she couldn't escape? The silence stretched between them, and for a moment, Emily considered walking away. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever it was Dominic was offering. But before she could speak, Dominic leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. I want to help you, Emily. I can help you get out of this life. But you have to let me in. You have to trust me. The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Emily's heart was pounding in her chest. She had heard those words before, from people who had promised to help her, only to let her down. She had always learned the hard way not to trust anyone. But there was something about Dominic, something that made her wonder if he was different. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say, how to answer him. Could she trust him? Or was this just another game? Dominic's gaze never wavered, his eyes searching hers as if he were trying to see past the walls she had built around herself. You don't have to make a decision right now, he said, his voice gentle. But think about it. You don't have to keep hiding. Not with me. Emily swallowed hard. She had never felt more conflicted in her life. But one thing was certain, this dinner, this conversation, was only the beginning. The next few days passed in a haze for Emily. She kept replaying Dominic's words over and over in her mind, unsure of what to do with them. He had promised her a way out, a chance to leave the life she had been trapped in for so long. But could she trust him? It was a question that gnawed at her constantly, one she couldn't shake. Every time she thought about it, her mind ran in circles. On the one hand, Dominic seemed genuine, his offer was different from the others she had heard in the past. He wasn't offering empty promises, but real power, a way to escape everything that held her down. But on the other hand, who was Dominic Marino? She had seen the way people moved aside for him, the way the world seemed to part for him like he was someone important, someone dangerous. Emily didn't know if she could step into that world, a world she knew so little about. She had always kept to the shadows, far from people like him. But now, for the first time in her life, she felt like she might be on the verge of something bigger, something that could change everything. The idea of escaping the life she had been living was tempting, but it scared her more than anything. What if she got caught in something deeper than she could handle? What if she lost herself along the way? Still, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Dominic. There was something about him, something magnetic. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but every encounter with him left her feeling like she had just stepped into a different world, one she wasn't sure she was ready for, but one she couldn't seem to resist. That evening, after another long day of work, Emily found herself standing at her apartment window, staring out at the city below. The neon lights blinked in the distance, a reminder of everything she had yet to experience. The life she had been living felt so small now, so contained. Dominic's words echoed in her mind again. You don't have to keep hiding. Not with me. It was an offer she couldn't ignore. But the fear still gripped her. She didn't know how to let go of the life she knew, even if it wasn't a life she wanted anymore. A knock at the door broke her thoughts, and she turned to see a sleek black car waiting outside her building. She knew who it was without even having to check. Dominic had kept his word. He had sent the car for her. It was time. With a deep breath, Emily grabbed her jacket and stepped out into the night, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what would happen next, but she was about to find out. The drive was quiet, the city lights blurring as they passed by. She felt like she was in a dream, suspended between the life she had left behind and the one that was waiting for her. When the car finally stopped, she stepped out into the night air, the cool breeze brushing against her skin. The restaurant was just ahead, its soft lights glowing warmly in the distance. She didn't know what to expect, but she couldn't deny the feeling that something important was about to unfold. Dominic was waiting for her inside, just as he had promised. As she walked through the door, his gaze met hers immediately, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. He stood there, tall and imposing, his presence filling the space as if he owned it. And in that moment, Emily realized something. This wasn't just a dinner. This wasn't just an opportunity to escape. This was a choice she was making, one that would change the course of her life forever. Dominic's eyes softened as she approached, and he held out his hand to her. It was an offer, an invitation. And though she still didn't fully understand everything that lay ahead, Emily knew that she couldn't walk away now. She took his hand, feeling the warmth of his grip, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear. She was stepping into the unknown, but she wasn't alone. And that, in itself, was enough to give her hope. The dinner was quiet at first, the kind of silence that felt heavy with expectation. Dominic sat across from Emily, his gaze never leaving her face. The soft hum of the restaurant around them seemed distant, almost as if it didn't exist at all. Emily tried to focus on the conversation, tried to ignore the knot of anxiety that twisted in her stomach. She was finally here, sitting across from him, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what he had to say. The waiter came by, refilling their wine glasses, but neither of them spoke. Dominic took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes still on her, studying her every move. Emily shifted in her seat, feeling the weight of his attention. "You don't have to be nervous," he said finally, his voice low and reassuring, but there was an edge to it. "I know this is all new to you." Emily met his gaze, surprised by the softness in his voice. She hadn't expected that. "It's just, this is all a lot to take in," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm not here to pressure you, Emily. But I think you've been running from your own potential for too long. You've been hiding." She felt a rush of emotions, all of them conflicting. She had been hiding, hadn't she? Hiding from the life she could have had, hiding from the future she might have built for herself. But could she trust Dominic to help her build that future? "I've spent my life just trying to get by," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I don't know how to do anything else." Dominic's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, she saw something like understanding in them. "You're stronger than you think, Emily," he said, his voice steady. "I see that in you. You've survived everything life has thrown at you, but it's time to stop surviving. It's time to start living." His words hung in the air, and Emily felt a pang in her chest. She had always been strong, hadn't she? But was strength enough to change her life? Was it enough to take that step into the unknown with someone like Dominic, a man whose world was so different from hers? "I don't know if I can just walk away from everything," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to trust someone like you." Dominic didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "You don't have to trust me right away," he said. "But you do have to trust yourself. You don't have to stay in the life you're in. You have a choice." Emily swallowed hard, her heart racing. She had never thought of it that way before. She had always thought that she had no choice but to keep going, to keep living the way she had been living. But Dominic was offering her a different path, one that didn't involve surviving, but living. "You think I can change?" she asked, her voice small. Dominic's gaze softened even further, and this time, there was no mistaking the sincerity in his eyes. "I know you can," he said, his voice low and firm. "I see the potential in you, Emily. All you need to do is take the first step." She sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. This was more than just a dinner. This was a moment that could change everything. Dominic was offering her a way out, a way to live a life she had never imagined for herself. But it wasn't just his offer that was pulling her in. It was the quiet confidence he exuded, the way he seemed to see things in her that she hadn't even seen in herself. For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to feel something other than fear. Hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was there, growing in the space between her and Dominic. "I don't know what will happen," she said finally, her voice steady now. "But I'm willing to try." Dominic's smile was slow, but it was genuine. "That's all I'm asking for." The rest of the evening passed in a haze for Emily. She was no longer focused on the meal or the surroundings, but on the conversation they were having, on the decision she had just made. For the first time in years, she felt like she was making a choice for herself, not just going along with what life had thrown at her. And as she looked across the table at Dominic, she realized that this wasn't just about him offering her a way out. It was about her finding the strength to step into the life she deserved. The days following their dinner felt like a turning point for Emily. She couldn't stop thinking about what Dominic had said. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he had looked at her, the quiet intensity in his gaze that made her feel like he saw through every layer she had carefully built around herself. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, but in a way that was oddly comforting. For the first time, someone had looked at her and actually seen her. It was unsettling, but in a way that made her feel alive, like maybe she was capable of something more than just surviving. She woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose she hadn't had in years. The weight that had settled on her shoulders for so long seemed a little lighter, and for the first time in ages, she felt like she was in control. Emily had always thought she was living a life she could never escape, stuck in a loop of endless struggle. But Dominic's offer, his quiet confidence, had planted a seed of hope. It wasn't just about escaping her current life, it was about stepping into something bigger, something she could actually build for herself. She spent the next few days reflecting, trying to sort through her emotions and figure out exactly what she wanted. She didn't want to rush into anything, but a small part of her knew that this opportunity might be the chance she had been waiting for. There was something about Dominic that made her want to trust him, something that felt genuine. It wasn't the flashy promises or grand gestures she had experienced in the past, it was the way he seemed to understand the depth of her struggle, without even needing to ask. It was the way he had offered his help without trying to control her, a quiet assurance that made her feel like she wasn't alone in this fight. On the fourth day after their dinner, Dominic reached out again. This time, it was a simple message asking if she wanted to meet. No pressure, just a conversation. Emily hesitated for only a moment before replying with a yes. She had spent enough time thinking about it. It was time to take that first step. The car arrived promptly at 7, just like the first time, and she found herself heading to the same restaurant, though everything felt different this time. There was no fear, no uncertainty. She wasn't walking into the unknown anymore, she was walking toward something she was beginning to believe in. When she entered the restaurant, Dominic was already waiting, seated at their usual table. This time, he stood to greet her, his expression warm but serious. There was no small talk, no wasted time. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice soft but carrying a weight of sincerity that made her heart skip a beat. "I know this is a big decision for you. And I want you to know that there's no rush. Take all the time you need." Emily smiled faintly, feeling the truth of his words settle over her. She had always been so quick to make decisions, often out of fear or necessity. But this time, she wasn't in a hurry. She wanted to make sure this was the right choice. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About what you said, about what I want from my life." Dominic nodded, as if he understood completely. "And what do you want, Emily?" he asked, his voice calm, expectant. Emily took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment where everything could change. She wasn't going to run anymore. "I want to take control," she said, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it before. "I want to stop hiding. I want to live for myself, not just for the next day, the next paycheck. I want to be someone, not just survive." Dominic smiled then, and it wasn't just a smile, it was a look of approval, of understanding. You already are someone, Emily. You've always been someone. You just needed to see it for yourself. She felt her heart swell in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Dominic had given her more than an opportunity, he had given her a reason to believe in herself again. They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing thoughts on what the future could hold, and for the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel alone. She was still scared, still uncertain about what came next, but the fear wasn't crippling anymore. It was just the beginning, and she was ready to take that first step, ready to walk into the life she had only ever dreamed of. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind for Emily. The more time she spent with Dominic, the more she realized just how much her life had changed. At first, it had felt like an impossible decision to leave behind the only life she knew, to trust someone who seemed so different from her. But as she spent more time with him, as they talked more about her future, she began to see it wasn't about trusting Dominic, it was about trusting herself. He had offered her a way out, a chance to build something new, and for the first time in her life, Emily was starting to believe it was possible. They met regularly, discussing her plans, her dreams, things she had buried deep down for so long. Dominic had a way of making her feel heard, of making her believe she was capable of things she had never thought possible. He pushed her, not in a way that made her feel uncomfortable, but in a way that made her want to be better. She knew she was growing, changing. She started taking steps toward the life she had always dreamed of but never thought she could have. She quit one of her jobs, the one that had drained her most, and began focusing on her nursing studies full-time. She started setting goals for herself, things she had never dared to set before. And with every small victory, she felt a sense of pride that had been missing for so long. But even as she was making progress, there was still a part of her that hesitated, that feared what it meant to really change. The past had a way of creeping back in, of reminding her that no matter how hard she worked, there were things she could never undo. She had been so used to fighting just to survive that she didn't know what it felt like to live without fear. One evening, after a long day of studying and a meeting with Dominic about her next steps, she found herself walking home, her mind swirling with everything she had learned and everything she still needed to do. She was making progress, but she still felt like there was a weight she couldn't shake. As she approached her apartment, her phone buzzed with a message from Dominic. "How are you doing?" it read. Emily smiled softly at the message. It wasn't just about business anymore. He had become someone she could talk to, someone who genuinely cared. She typed back quickly. "I'm doing better, but sometimes it feels like I'm still holding on to the past." There was a pause before his reply came. "You don't have to hold on to it anymore. I'm here for you. You always have me." His words, simple as they were, meant more than she had expected. It was strange how much someone could change your world without even trying. For the first time in ages, Emily felt like she wasn't alone, like she had someone who believed in her, someone who saw more in her than she saw in herself. She looked up at the building in front of her, the same one she had lived in for the last few years, but tonight, it felt different. It felt like a place she was ready to leave behind, a chapter she was ready to close. She had been hiding here, just trying to survive. But now, she was starting to realize she didn't have to. Dominic had shown her that. And now, she was ready to take that next step. With a deep breath, Emily walked into her apartment, the weight on her shoulders lighter than it had been in years. She was still afraid, still unsure of what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of living. She was ready to live. And that, in itself, was everything. It had been a few months since Emily made the decision to take control of her life, and as she looked around at the changes she had made, she realized just how much she had grown. Her days were no longer consumed by just surviving. She was living, truly living, in a way that she had never thought possible. Dominic had kept his word. He had supported her every step of the way, offering guidance, encouragement, and a sense of security she had never known before. It wasn't just about the financial stability he had helped provide, it was about the belief he had in her, the way he had seen potential in her when no one else had. As she sat at her desk, Preparing for the final exams of her nursing program, Emily couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought her to this moment. She had fought hard to get here, but she was proud of the person she was becoming. The woman who had been too afraid to take risks, to trust anyone, was now standing on the edge of something bigger, something she had built for herself. Dominic's presence in her life had been a catalyst for change, but it was her own strength that had allowed her to move forward. She knew she still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited about the future. That evening, after another long day of studying, Emily received a message from Dominic. It was simple, but it made her smile. "I'm proud of you." 3 words that meant more to her than anything else. She had spent so many years doubting herself, but now, for the first time, she was starting to believe in her own worth. As she sat there, scrolling through her phone, she thought back to the first time they had met, how uncertain she had been, how afraid she had been to let anyone in. And now, here she was, stronger than she had ever been, ready to take on the world. The next day, Dominic called. They had been meeting regularly, but this call felt different. There was an urgency in his voice, something that made Emily's heart race. "I need you to come to my office," he said. "There's something we need to discuss." She didn't hesitate. She had learned to trust him, to trust herself. She got dressed, gathered her things, and headed to his office. When she arrived, she found Dominic waiting for her in the lobby, looking as composed as ever. But there was something in his eyes, something that told her this was important. They didn't exchange pleasantries. He led her into his office, where a seat was already waiting for her. "I've been thinking about your future," he began, his voice steady. "And I think it's time for you to take the next step." Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Dominic leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "I think you're ready. You've proven yourself, and I believe you're more than capable of handling the responsibility." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What responsibility?" she asked, feeling a twinge of nervousness. Dominic smiled, but it was different this time. It wasn't just the calm, reassuring smile she was used to, it was the smile of someone who knew exactly what he was offering. "I'm offering you an opportunity, Emily," he said. "I want you to work with me. To build something bigger than either of us could do alone." Emily's mind raced. She had never imagined this kind of opportunity. She had spent years just getting by, surviving, never allowing herself to dream beyond the confines of her circumstances. But now, here it was, an opportunity to be part of something meaningful, something that could change the course of her life. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic reached across the desk, placing his hand on hers in a gesture of assurance. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said. "But I want you to think about it. This is your chance, Emily. I've seen what you're capable of. I believe in you." The weight of his words settled on her, and for a moment, she was silent, trying to process everything. She had come so far in such a short time, and now she had a decision to make, a decision that would define the rest of her life. But deep down, she knew one thing for certain, she was no longer afraid. She had fought her way to this moment, and she wasn't about to let fear hold her back now. With a steady breath, Emily looked at Dominic, her eyes meeting his. "I'm in," she said, her voice strong and certain. "Let's do this." And in that moment, she knew her life was about to change forever.